Welcome to this video, round 7 coverage of the Gashimov Memorial. And if you look at the pairings for this round, you sort of immediately think that the game of the day must be Nakamura versus Carlsen. And indeed it is. Not because, well, on paper it sounds like the most interesting pairing, but in fact it also was the by far most interesting game of this round. A brief word about the two other games. We had Rajabov playing Mamedyarov, Rajabov being the co-leader of this tournament with his win against Carlsen and a couple of draws. He played the draw against Mamedyarov, a pretty unexciting game out of an English opening, English Retty type of opening where white sometimes has a tiny edge, but it quickly evaporated into nothing. Kayakin Caruana was a longer game, so almost 50 moves. It was quite funny to see that for the first 29 moves, both players only spent like 5 minutes in a theoretical Grunfeld. It's sometimes really a bit sick if you look at those kind of games where you see that more than half of the game, 30 moves, 29 moves, was prepared beforehand. It looked like Kayakin maybe has some practical chances, but okay, Caruana defended this precisely to a draw. So it really comes to the game you all expect to be the game of the day, Nakamura playing Carlsen. Of course, there is a big history already between the two players where Nakamura has lost 9 classical time control games and didn't won even a single game. I mean, it's 9-0 with a couple of draws, and the trend is not exactly great for Nakamura. He had a totally winning position in Zurich and lost it, and he also lost in the second round of this tournament, where it was a pretty relatively clear affair. I mean, Nakamura wasn't winning at any point, or even better in this game, in the second round. So let's see what happened here. Nakamura playing white. He's going for the Nimzo with f3. Yeah, one of the really topical lines nowadays, which was expected in a way. About 2.5 years ago, when I did this small video series on my channel on the d4 repertoire, I also recommended f3. Well, it's not like the top players watch my channel and say, well, f3 is a good move. But back then it already was clear that f3 is one of the sharpest tries. And it sets like serious, not problems, but it's a challenge in a way, because white is really intending to get this big center, and black cannot play any sort of second-rate setups. Yeah, he must really know what he's doing. Carlsen has faced this really a number of times against Nakamura, against Anand, against Kayakin earlier in the tournament. Against Kayakin he played castles. After a3 we had no, he went to h5, had this position, and Carlsen got a really good position out of the opening. Here he's going for c5. Interesting choice. I'll explain later why. d5, castles, e4, and d6. Yeah, it's very interesting for me to watch this, because as you probably know, I'm working on a book on the Nimzo Indian and Bogo Indian, playing presenting a black repertoire, and this is my repertoire choice against f3 in this book. I'm analyzing the d6 line here as Carlsen played, and also b5, which is even sharper. So I was very curious to see how this game, of course, went, because I can compare it with my almost finished yeah, what's the word? My almost finished documents for the book and analysis. After this, white's main moves are knight to e2 and bishop to d3. Bishop d3, black can play b5 again, playing in gambit style. Very interesting. White shouldn't even take the pawn. And after knight e2, there also black can play a quick b5. This is very interesting and sharp line. And Nakamura plays bishop d2, which can transpose to knight e2. Really, it leads to the same structure at least. Here, of course, b5 is simply prevented because white can take with the knight. This doesn't make any sense. But what black can do is he can develop the knight first, knight d7. And yeah, the problem of all these f3 setups in the Nimzo, in the Sämisch, and other lines in the d4 complex is always that this knight does not have a normal developing square, and it needs to travel mostly to g3. So knight e2 was played, knight e5, threatening mate, by the way. It's quite funny. White shouldn't play a3 or something. I need to put it on the board. I always
checkmate.
Think this is quite funny. So of course the knight went to g3, and now after the capture and white recaptures, we get a structure that in my book I call the Nimzo Benoni. Not sure if this is an official term, but it is a Benoni structure, d6, c5 against this pawn chain. A typical structure from the modern Benoni, where the bishop is on b4 instead of g7 with the fianchetto. This, of course, is a very substantial difference, and it's not so clear if it works in any side's favor, really. It has some advantages, it has some disadvantages. Of course, the bishop on g7 is not badly placed. The long diagonal is quite nice to sit on. But g6, on the other hand, can also be a weakness on the king side. If you imagine the pawn being on g6, okay, there is a bishop on g7, but still there is some weakness. White sometimes can exchange the dark squared bishop, play f4, get an attack. This is not so easy to do here. Sometimes black even has a square on g6 for the knight, which sometimes is tricky in the modern Benoni because the g6 square is always occupied by the pawn. So the knight on e5 does not have a good retreat square in case of being attacked. Yeah, and another issue with the bishop here on b4 is quite often it can be useful on b6. We'll see that later in the game. Yeah, bishop d7, a3. Not sure if this is strictly necessary, but it's not a bad move. Very often black will play bishop a5 anyway. So, okay, bishop a5, bishop e2, and now Carlsen plays b5 immediately. Does not really need the move a6 here. The point is that white cannot really take on b5. If we look at this briefly, knight takes b5 is the only capture to even consider. After that, you see that c4 is very annoying for white. There is play on the b file and there is knight to d3. So very good play for black. White shouldn't do that. He just castled, which is just better. And now c4. Yeah, this is the structure that usually develops from this line, with black having those pawns here on b5 and on c4. This sometimes ensures a good square on d3. At the moment, of course, the bishop on e2 is protecting that, but it sometimes gives a good square here. Also, b3 can be a useful post for the knight, if you imagine the knight being on c5, for example. And of course, the bishop can be placed on b6, which normally leads to a trade of those pieces, as white cannot really tolerate a bishop on b6. This is exactly what happens in the game. Yeah, white does not want to take on b6 and allow a recapture with check. So all those moves look fairly normal to me. Knight d1 now by Nakamura. That's an interesting move, really. It intends a regrouping to e3, maybe even recapturing with the knight. and this would send a second knight towards the f5 square. This is of course also a difference compared to the modern Benoni, where the g6 pawn is always controlling f5. This is not happening here. And black can rarely play pawn to g6 after the dark squared bishops are exchanged. So this is a difference that black needs to be aware of. And it also here on d1, it looks at those squares and might even support a further a4 push. I think around here the position is probably somewhere between equal and slightly better for white maybe, but it's a very interesting and complicated position. So I think black shouldn't be afraid to play this structure. Here there's an interesting moment and something where I'm not sure if this is the right setup. It's interesting. Carlsen now plays bishop back to c8, which at first looks a bit weird. Why would he sort of undevelop the piece? It has an interesting idea though. He wants to free d7 for the knight so that this maneuver is possible. That's very interesting and maybe worth spending time for. I'm not sure. In the game it does not really lead to such a great position, but I don't really want to call it a mistake. I'm really not sure. The, let's say, normal move, yeah, is rook e8, or let's say it looks normal to me, like putting the rook here, yeah, maybe intensifying some pressure on e4 so that f4 is tougher to play. If we consider just to put some moves on the board, king h1, it's hard to do without the move in the long run anyway. King h1, and let's say you go a5, trying to use your majority here, 3 against 2, and yeah, just let's say something like that. This feels like an unclear position to me. I don't really know how to assess it. I don't think black should be in terrible shape here. White cannot so easily push f4, and because e4 is always somewhat of a weakness. Yeah, hard to judge. I mean, I wouldn't mind to play this with both sides. It's interesting to play. Okay, well, Carlsen played differently. He played bishop to c8, king h1, and now knight to d7. This was the idea, putting the knight on c5. Okay, so now f4 was played, and knight went back to g6. Yeah, as mentioned, this is very often the retreat square that now is available because there is no pawn on g6. Yeah, here Nakamura took on b6. Here there was an interesting alternative, and this is a4. This is recommended by the computer, and in my case this is Houdini what I use. So a4, not a revolutionary concept. Try to use the a file. It can lead to very interesting complications. This, for example, can be quite interesting, where black is not that. Black is threatening knight to b3, and here white has two alternatives. He can play bishop to d1, just defending this in a way. Interesting move. Or white can even simply take, which is interesting. Something like that is quite an interesting sacrifice, as c4 will fall, and then white has yeah, 1 to 2 pawns and a very interesting space advantage. Black is not very well coordinated here. An interesting line. However, there is also bishop d1 as mentioned, which is interesting, just covering b3. Could also be quite good for white. Black can, after a4, also play a6. This is possible. But, after that, white has sort of inserted this, opening up the a file. which at the moment seems more to white's advantage, as he's got the rook on a1 already. There are also direct attempts. Interestingly enough, the computer wants to play bishop g4, which looks strange to me, but in fact is quite interesting. Yeah, the idea sometimes can be really just to take the knight and then push the f-pawn with tempo, f5, f6. Quite interesting idea. For example, if black now takes, white recaptures and knight c5. Yeah, this looks fairly logical. Then white can take and put this on f5, and this should be quite good for white, I think. Not like decisive, but yeah, it looks interesting. a4 was an interesting alternative. I mean, Nakamura's move wasn't bad. I'm just pointing out some things that needed to be considered. Okay, rook b6 is the only move really. If black recaptures with the queen, for example, there is f5, and after this there is f6, and white is almost winning. Black cannot stand this. Yeah, this leads to a direct checkmate. Now, this is in fact very important, as the rook is not terribly well placed on b6. Okay, knight to e3. Again, a4 was an alternative. Knight e3. Knight c5. This, of course, was the whole idea behind bishop c8 and everything, putting the knight on c5. Okay, bishop d1 played, yeah, to cover b3. And now the next move played by Carlsen is maybe not really good. I mean, it's very tough to analyze this game because there are so many possibilities coming up, and it's difficult to determine the real decisive, the turning points where really the game was yeah, not decided, but where the important spots lie. Yeah, well, this was played, and it seems that after this, white will get an advantage. Maybe black needs to do something more passive. I mean, if I read this correctly, Carlsen in the press conference pointed out that he had considered something like f6, sort of, yeah, just controlling e5, making sort of a purely defensive move. He had considered, but it looked too passive to him. That I can very much understand. It looks like a terribly passive move. But maybe just objectively speaking, from an analytical point of view, this would have been better. He played knight d3, the more active move, but it does not seem to work out so nicely. And we see what happens. Nakamura plays f5. Good move. There also was this one, quite interesting actually, covering f4 from h5, and you still have this idea. But okay, I don't want to make a 3-hour-long video. This was interesting. It wasn't necessarily better, but also worth considering. f5 was good. It leads to a wide edge without any doubt. Knight g to f4. This is forced actually. Yeah, this looks far more natural, but unfortunately there is f6, and yeah, if black plays g6 now, otherwise white will take. Yeah, it's better to let him take, but just to show g6, there is knight c4, and black can resign with a clear conscience, or whatever. Queen h6 is winning. So black must go here, and this is the problem of the setup. Those two knights, I mean, they're sort of they're invasion forces, but they're also tied together. You cannot move any of the knights, as then the other one, yeah, well, this knight does not have a square on f4 really, and no, this is crazy. How can I do that? It was an accident. I didn't Oh, okay. Can let the pieces blink. Yeah, well, this knight, it does not have a retreat square. And the whole thing gets tactical now. Some concrete lines need to be checked. I think Nakamura is doing a good job here. He plays a4. Yeah, this idea we have seen before, opening up the a file at the right moment. And yeah, ab5 would destroy black's structure, so a6 must be played. And here Nakamura played knight g4, which is good. It leads to a white edge, no doubt. There also was the move b3, which was interesting, I think, focusing on the queen side. After that, that's also difficult for black to find a really good move, because, well, white is just threatening to take on c4 twice. And what exactly are you going to do? If black takes, which maybe he needs to do, I'm not sure, but it seems like that, then this knight on d3 has lost its anchor. And it's easily imaginable that those kind of knights, I mean, there should be some sort of material loss coming up. b3 was very interesting. But Nakamura's move is also strong. It's not like it's a mistake. Knight to g4. With a simple idea, you take it. And after that, black only has one reply. It's totally forced now. He must play h5. Yeah, the only move. Otherwise, white just takes. And he just dropped back to f2. A good move. A good move. There also was rook takes f4, which could be considered, and it also seems to be quite good for white. I mean, his move was perfectly okay, but this also was quite strong, I think. Black probably needs to take on g4, as knight takes f4 is answered by this funny desperado move, which destroys black's structure. Black needs to take, queen takes, and now probably queen g5. Yeah, he cannot really allow white to take, so queen g5, and now queen back to f2. And yeah, here white has sacrificed an exchange, but the concrete lines are just very good for white. If you look at this, yeah, needs to move, and now white can take here. And you notice that the queen, it does not have many squares. Can easily get trapped, the queen. Let's say after this, queen d4, there is this very strong threat. Something like that can easily trap the queen. Yeah, white has some very good chances here for the exchange. Probably this is why after rook takes, black should take on g4. And well, this is after rook g4, just a pawn for the moment. It's not totally clear though after knight e5, because white has also exchanged some active piece. So it's not totally clear. Let's say rook f4. There's also a5, by the way, quite interesting. Rook f4, queen g5 is not totally clear. Black has activated somewhat. Yeah, and this a5 move, also interesting. So rook takes f4 here in this position was an interesting alternative. Nakamura's move is good though. No point of criticism there. Yeah, here Carlsen played queen to f6, which is again probably forced. It's not. I don't really see any alternative. You need to activate the queen here and get this play going. Something like, let's say that this capture is oops, something like that is almost hopeless. There is f6 coming, knight to h5. You just have a weak king side with little defensive forces. So he needed to do that. And here we come to a very important spot. It's there are many in this game, but here that's very important. It seems that in this position Nakamura really could have gotten a huge advantage. Yeah, as I already sort of spoiled it. He didn't play the move. He took on d3, which still keeps an advantage. Yeah, it's not terribly bad, but it seems that knight takes h5 was strong here, and it has the very nice. Yeah, what's very nice is so was totally forced. Black must recapture here. What else is there? And now knight takes d3, c takes d, and a5. Yeah, and this seems to be very good for white. If we consider now the rook move, yeah, well, b7 or b8, I'm not quite sure actually. Maybe here, bishop takes h5. Yeah, maybe rook b8 was better. I'm not quite sure. But okay, if we just consider the whole thing here, white now has two ways to go. You can play b4 and then try to capture d3 just for free, or you can even take d3 now, because after queen takes there is also this f6 move here, which is probably quite promising for white. This looks very, very good for white. Maybe b4 is even better, as you cannot really keep the pawn here. There is also sometimes this idea to get it. Note that in this structure the bishop on d7 is totally dead. I mean, this is just a terrible piece. And this is the real problem here. It's not just the pawn. I mean, white is probably 1 to 2 pawns up in the near future, but this bishop on d7 is just terrible. And there is not much what black can do against it, really. It's totally forced. Knight h5. What should black do? You cannot play, let's say, a queen here. It's knight g4. It's really a forced line, and very good for white. I mean, this is Nakamura's move, and it also keeps an advantage, but it is not so clear in comparison. It took recaptured, of course, and now queen e3. Here knight takes h5. Black can play queen b2, which is also not bad for white. You can play that bishop c2 and then play for an attack on the king. It's not very convincing, but you can do it. This is better. Queen e3, Nakamura's move is better. Now well, rook b7. Yeah, this was just attack the rook, and the computer suggests knight c5, but this is a terrible self-pin. I mean, suggests means it's not like super great, but it looks very unnatural for a human. So rook b7 is okay. And now we took on h5. In fact, here I think white has also an improvement. Knight h5 is also good for white, but a takes b first is probably somewhat better in comparison. And the idea is, after a takes b, knight h5, queen h6. This is very similar to the game. We will see that. But now white can play queen d4, keeping the queens on. And, well, obviously the queen on d4 is quite nice, putting the queen in this central square. And this also looks very promising for white. If you consider what exactly is black's idea now. The bishop on c8 is yeah, very sorry piece. Probably something like rook here and rook b7. But it should be good for white, shouldn't it? Rook a6 maybe here, attacking here. It looks quite good for white. I think it's somewhat better than the game. In the game, it was very. You can compare this. Queen h6, and now a difference is now queen d4. If you look at this, this is not so clear, because black can now take here, getting some play on b2. The a file is not open. Or I can consider this move to, after this, recapture with the bishop, after which the bishop is at least somewhat activated. I guess this didn't appeal to Nakamura, so he exchanged on h6. Also take note, white is a pawn up the whole time. It's not like black is having extra material or anything. White is entering here. Yeah, I cannot. Yeah, it's almost an end game with an extra pawn. Took there. Took there. Now he played bishop c2. Very interesting spot, in fact. b2 is hanging, and should white defend it? Very interesting question. The computer actually suggests rook b1 with white advantage, which I find quite remarkable because it looks a bit strange, but very passive. Yeah, black will play rook a7. I mean, white advantage, very small advantage, because black gets this activity here. And this should be okay, really, for black. Nakamura played bishop c2, which is much more active, and I think also the more human move, really. And here it's interesting. I think Carlsen really could have taken on b2. I didn't have the opportunity to watch the game live today, or the press conference, as I was playing myself in a league game. So I don't know what both players said about knight takes b2. Carlsen could have taken on b2 here. And it would be interesting to learn, because, well, if you look at it with engine assistance, it just gives it 0, 0, 0. Of course, it's not an easy thing to assess this, because white definitely has an attack going. This is clear. So I understand that maybe it just seemed risky to Carlsen. Yeah, white can give this check, which is a very obvious way to play. After this,
check,
can easily have a perpetual. On the other hand, white can also play something like that, trying to get this attack going, and this can lead to very sharp lines. For example, b4, check, and now rook a6, which is obviously very sharp, intending, yeah, to take on d6 and then get this mate in. Of course, black has some things himself. He can cover here. Rook c6, b3, for example. Yeah, and now white can take here. This is a very interesting position, which is very difficult to assess. White has at the moment 2 pawns for the piece, but an overwhelming position. The knight on f6, all pieces active. Yeah, the computer is just giving it a 0, 0, 0, probably leading to some sort of perpetual. But this is possible. I don't know. It's very tricky. Maybe a knight b2 is definitely, it seems, better than the game, but tough to assess. Carlsen dropped back to e5. And after that, it seems that white should be better again. Played rook a6, rook d8, and starting from here, it goes wrong for white. Yeah, you sort of. I mean, really, if you have seen the history of games between the two players, Nakamura really had some good positions. I mean, okay, the one that he had in Zurich, this +10 or whatever position, well, this is not comparable, but this is still a very nice position for white. After black had retreated to e5, white has a pawn at the moment, but of course he needs to be very alert about those pawns here, b5 and c4. Black's idea is to push the pawns and promote one of them. And well, white has a pawn, which is basically the g pawn that got lost for black. Yeah, but what white also has, he's got active rook, active knight. So he should try to convert the pawn in the long run, and he must avoid that those pawns get too dangerous. And it seems that with time running low, Nakamura does not find the right piece coordination. It really goes yeah, in the wrong way now for him. He plays knight to g3, which is maybe the first step in the wrong direction. Some move like, let's say, rook c1, or maybe prophylactically moving the rook away, maybe rook a8, something like that. It's maybe better. It's not easy to analyze, really. I only had limited time. As mentioned, I was away the whole day to play myself. It's difficult to tell what's the best move is really. But this seems to be too slow, and we see that after rook b8. Yeah, this is preventing rook a8, and it prepares in the long run bishop b7. Rook a7 was played now, b4, and now knight e2. Yeah, this was obviously the idea. Nakamura wanted to get the knight over to d4, which looks logical, really. But the big problem was after bishop d7, I think here he really should play the knight to d4, which he didn't, strangely enough. I think knight d4 was really the logical follow-up after all that. I mean, black by now has some play. I mean, b3, for example, and now let's say, not sure, rook a8, rook c8. Those moves are interesting. Even this is interesting. Yeah. Always note that if you assess a position with uneven material, here, white is a pawn up, try to assess the position. One idea is, if you are not sure, am I really a pawn up? Am I +1 if you live in computer terms? Yeah, if you want an additional tool or help to assess, just put a pawn on g7 in your mind and try to assess this position. If you feel that with a pawn on g7 you would be worse as white, really worse, then you don't really have a clear extra pawn. And in fact, if black would have a pawn on g7 here or pawn on g5, let's say, it would be very, very clear that black is better, because the pawn here is dangerous, and it's a great knight on e5 and so on. So white must be very precise here. It's not like he has an extra pawn for nothing. Yeah, this was very slow, this maneuver here, this knight maneuver, starting here with g3, e2, and so on. It really gave Carlsen lots of activity on the queen side. Yeah, but here rook a1 was played, and after that it gets tricky for white, really, really tricky. Bishop b5. Well, as mentioned, knight d4 should have been played. The computer also suggests a very funny move in my book, because it looks very unhuman. Rook b1. I'm not really sure what this is doing. I mean, it sort of works against the pawns, but it's not a move that would come easy to you, really. And it's not like the computer is giving white a big advantage, but it just suggests it as one of the best defensive tries. A very tough to play move. Okay, rook a1, bishop b5. Okay, now c3 is threatened, and yeah, Carlsen played h3. Again, the computer wants to play rook b1, trying to defend. Note that knight d4 can now already be answered with this. Yeah, this is now really, really quick on the queen side. And black will win. There is this move and rook b3, c3. Just too much on the queen side. It now really is very, very tough to defend. This is played by Nakamura. He wants to prevent any knight g4 business and give the king some room, but it seems to be too slow. This rook b1 move again is the suggested idea. Rook d to c8, yeah, obviously supporting the pawns, and now king h2 was played. Yeah, and I think after that white is lost, really. Again, the computer wants to play this move, which is also good for black already, but it at least keeps the game going. After king h2, well, c3, we can now look at a completely forced sequence. c3, knight moves, it is attacked. Knight d4, took on b2, rook to b1, and rook c4. This is totally forced. And the next moves also, the knight is just attacked, it must take on b5, the only move. Rook takes c2. Yeah, now we're on move 41, so the time trouble was over. And here Nakamura played knight d4. Yeah, he could have played knight takes d6. That's also a move. However, after rook d8, it does not really help much. This is attacked, and white does not have a good square. If he goes to b5, for example, there is this check and knight d2, which promotes the b pawn. Yeah, Nakamura went to d4, and here Carlsen quite uncharacteristically missed a very direct win. Well, he had seen the game continuation, which also probably wins, but is not so decisive. See, b3 was the hardest, the toughest continuation for white. After that, you really lost. The problem is, okay, white obviously cannot take. This is very easy. And what black is just threatening here is something like rook b4, attacking the knight, and if it moves, there is this sequence. Or alternatively, something like that will just promote the pawn. So this would have been even quicker. He played rook d2 after knight c6, rook e8. Yeah, and here it's quite remarkable that Nakamura didn't play knight takes e5, because this really would have put up some resistance. I mean, it's probably losing, but it's what you should try at least. Knight takes e5, rook takes e5, rook a2. Yeah, going to this rook ending. After rook takes e4, rook takes, rook takes, rook takes. There's king g7, and the king invades. This is very, very likely lost, but okay, it seems a bit tougher than the game. He played rook a4. And this endgame is also the reason why this b3 move was a bit more precise, because after that white just resigns in a couple of moves. And this endgame he could have dragged on. Yeah, here after knight d3, the pawn is just too strong. We had this happening, and now black will yeah, basically win the exchange. One of those rooks needs to go for the pawn, and now the two rooks, being very active, are doing a nice mob up job here. The knight on b4 is also without any good outpost.
Check. Check.
Yeah, this was the conclusion of the game. Rook knight d8, and after rook e8, Nakamura resigned. Yeah, knight f7 could have been the follow-up, and now rook d5 traps the knight, and black will just win this piece. Following something like king here and rook f8, for example, it is just trapped. So a tragic outcome again for Nakamura, who simply, yeah, cannot convert a good position against Carlsen. I mean, I'm not quite sure how to describe it. I mean, he lost 10 games in classical time control now. Didn't win any. And if you look at those losses, I mean, from the 10 losses, there are maybe 5 or 6 straightforward ones. But there are really some games where he had a very good position, and this is one of those games. I mean, in the around move 26 here, this spot where he could have played knight takes h5, this would have been very, very strong, probably winning. I mean, somewhere around here there were more than one interesting ways to play, and he actually didn't do a bad job, but he never really increased the advantage to such extent that Carlsen was totally lost. He missed this chance here, and after that it always was a bit murky and not at all easy to play. And yeah, Carlsen always went for the most active defense. Didn't didn't play any passive moves, always tried to keep his chances intact, even if it was objectively not great. There always were some chances for black. So for this tournament, it means that Carlsen is taking the lead again. Now with he has this really strange pattern. He won 2 games from the start in round 1 and 2, then a draw, then 2 losses, now 2 wins again, and both wins with black. So quite remarkable. It's also quite scary to notice that now he has got a +2 score, and this is not even good enough to keep his rating. So high is the rating at the moment that he has. Okay, so tomorrow we have Carlsen playing white against Caruana. Very interesting matchup, of course, as Caruana had won this very convincing game in the first turn of the tournament. So it would be very interesting to see what Carlsen is doing with white against Caruana. And yeah, very interesting game yet again. Well, it's almost guaranteed between the 2 players to get a good and interesting game. And for those of you who want to know my game that I played today, I played a draw today in a league game, which was very important. We had the final round of our league, the 3rd league in Germany. And with this, we played a draw in the overall match. We tied our match 4-4, which meant that we stay in our league and don't get relegated to the league below. It was a very important match, and very glad that we managed that. My game wasn't terribly exciting for those of you who might want to see it. It was a draw in about 20 moves. I had equalized quite easily with black, and the draw was very okay for the overall standings of the match. Okay, so thanks for watching this, and I'll be back tomorrow with a new round 8. Thanks for watching.